On the night my father burned everything I owned, he told the neighbors it was discipline. What he didn't know was that he was burning the only daughter who would have tried to save him. The flames climbed high enough to light the entire block in Cincinnati. My sketchbooks curled into black petals. My thrift store dresses shrank into nothing. The old quilt my grandmother stitched by hand, tiny blue flowers, uneven seams, caught last. It held on longer than everything else. I watched it fight. Maybe now she'll learn respect, my father, Daniel Whitmore, announced, loud enough for Mrs. Hargrove next door to hear through her screen door. I was 16. My crime? I applied to an out-of-state art program without asking permission. In my father's world, sons carried the name, daughters carried obedience. And Luke, my older brother, was the future of Whitmore. He stood near the garage, arms crossed, grease still on his knuckles from helping Dad tune up a customer's truck. He didn't smile. He didn't defend me either. Back then, I thought silence meant agreement. I didn't understand yet that silence can also mean survival. My mother, Elaine, stayed inside. I could see her shadow moving past the kitchen window. She didn't come out. She never did when Dad decided to make a spectacle of something. The barrel popped as something inside it burst. I flinched. Dad didn't. "You don't get to make decisions in this house," he said, turning toward me now instead of the crowd he imagined was watching. "You live under my roof. You follow my rules." The words hit harder than the heat, because deep down, I knew what he really meant. You belong to me. The neighbors eventually went back inside. The flames shrank, the air filled with the bitter smell of melted plastic and scorched cotton. I stood there until there was nothing left worth watching. That night, the house felt smaller, quieter, not peaceful, just emptied out. Luke knocked on my bedroom door once. "You shouldn't have pushed him," he muttered. I stared at the blank space on my wall where my acceptance letter used to be taped. "I didn't push him. I applied to a school." He shifted his weight. "You know how he is." Yeah, I did. That was the problem. After midnight, the house settled into its usual rhythm. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft thud of pipes, Dad's heavy footsteps crossing the hallway one last time before bed. I waited. Then I moved. I pulled my backpack from under the bed. Inside, I packed what little I had left: jeans that had been in the laundry, a toothbrush, $42 in crumpled bills I'd saved from waitressing shifts at the diner, and one thing he hadn't found: my portfolio. I had hidden it weeks earlier inside the vent behind my dresser. I don't know why. Maybe part of me always knew this was coming. I unscrewed the vent cover with shaking fingers and slid the folder out. The edges were slightly bent, but the drawings were intact. Proof I existed outside his rules. I didn't write a note. There was nothing left to explain. When I lifted the window, cold air rushed in. For a second, I hesitated, not because I was afraid of leaving, because I realized I wasn't sure anyone would come after me. That hurt more than the fire. I swung my legs over the sill and dropped into the grass below. The yard still smelled faintly like smoke. For a moment, I looked at the house. The same house where Dad taught Luke how to change brake pads. The same house where Mom made pot roast every Sunday. The same house where I learned to draw faces in the margins of my math homework. It looked ordinary. That's the dangerous thing about certain kinds of control. From the outside, it looks like structure. From the inside, it feels like suffocation. I walked 3 blocks before I let myself cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to let the shock move through me. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know about shelters yet, or GED programs, or real estate licenses. I didn't know that one day I would understand contracts better than the man who used them to cage me. All I knew was this: if I stayed, I would disappear. If I left, I might survive. So I kept walking. Behind me, the last embers in the barrel finally died out. My father thought a fire was a warning. He didn't realize it was a beginning. The first night I slept away from home wasn't dramatic. No rain, no cinematic thunder, no one chasing me down the street. Just a thin mattress in a women's shelter off Reading Road in Cincinnati, and a lock on the door that I controlled. That lock meant more than comfort ever could. The intake volunteer didn't ask what I did to deserve being there. She asked, "Are you safe?" It was the first time anyone had framed my life that way. Not, "Are you obedient?" Not, "Are you grateful?" Not, "Did you provoke him?" Just, "Are you safe?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure. Safety felt unfamiliar, like a coat I hadn't grown into yet. I stayed 3 weeks. In that time, I learned something important about survival. It isn't loud, it's logistical. You fill out forms, you stand in lines, you memorize bus routes, you keep receipts, you show up early. I got my GED within 6 months. I worked mornings at a diner downtown and nights stocking shelves at a grocery store. I slept 4 hours on good days. I saved everything. I didn't buy coffee. I didn't buy new clothes. I didn't buy anything that couldn't fit inside a backpack. Control, I realized, often hides in paperwork. Leases, titles, loan agreements, utility bills, credit reports. My father controlled the house because his name was on every document. Ownership wasn't emotional. It was legal. So I started paying attention. At community college, I took an intro course on business law just to fill a requirement. I ended up loving it. Contracts weren't personal. They were structured, clear, predictable, unlike my childhood. While I was memorizing definitions like collateral and default, things back home were shifting. I heard about it through Luke. He texted me one afternoon out of nowhere. "Garage is finally open. Dad named it Whitmore Auto Legacy." Of course he did. Luke never wanted the garage. He liked engines, sure, but he liked graphic design more. He used to sketch car logos in his notebooks. Dad called that a hobby. A man needs something with his name on it, Dad always said. So Luke's name got welded to a business plan he didn't create. The first year, the garage did okay. Second year, slower. Third year, Dad refinanced the house to expand operations. That's how he phrased it. Expand operations. Not risk everything. Not tie the family home to a struggling business. Expand operations. I didn't feel anger when Luke told me. I felt distance. I was 21 by then, renting a tiny studio with peeling paint, but a lease in my own name. I paid my utilities on time. I built credit. I understood interest rates. Back home, Dad refinanced again, this time to consolidate equipment loans. That word, consolidate, sounds responsible. It isn't always. By 23, I had my associate's degree and passed the real estate licensing exam on my first try. The day I got my license, I held it in my hands longer than necessary. My name printed clean and official. Claire Whitmore. No one else's permission attached. I started working at a small brokerage, then moved to a title company. That's where I truly learned the system. Titles tell stories. You can see marriages in them, divorces, deaths, desperation, ambition. You can see when someone borrows too much, when equity thins, when risk starts stacking like unstable bricks. One Tuesday afternoon, a foreclosure list crossed my desk. I wasn't even looking for anything personal, just scanning addresses. Then I saw it. Whitmore, Daniel, my childhood address, filed under default. For a moment, the office noise faded. Phones ringing, printers humming, people laughing near the break room. I stared at the numbers: missed payments, accrued interest, legal notices issued. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was leverage that had snapped. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I felt something colder. Recognition. The same man who once said I would never survive without his roof over my head had gambled that roof on pride. I printed the file and slipped it into a folder, not out of vengeance, out of awareness. That night, lying in my small, rented apartment, I thought about the fire, about the way Dad said, "You live under my roof." Back then, I believed that the roof was power. Now I understood. Power isn't the roof, it's the deed. And for the first time in my life, I knew exactly how deeds change hands. Luke called me on a Thursday night. I almost didn't answer. His name lit up my phone, and for a second, I just stared at it. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Our last exchange had been stiff, surface level, weather updates and forced politeness. Nothing real. I picked up on the fourth ring. "Hey," he said. He didn't sound like the golden child anymore. He sounded tired. There was noise behind him, metal clanking, maybe tools hitting concrete. The garage. "You busy?" he asked. "I can talk." Silence lingered a second too long. "I didn't know who else to call," he finally said. That was new. Luke had always known exactly who to call. Dad, suppliers, bankrupts, anyone but me. "What's going on?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "We're in trouble. Not we're expanding, not we're growing, not we're restructuring. Trouble." The garage, Whitmore Auto Legacy, had been bleeding money for months. Equipment loans with variable interest, a crypto investment Dad pushed him into that tanked, 2 fleet contracts that fell through. "We're behind on payments," Luke admitted. "Dad keeps saying it'll turn around." "Will it?" I asked. Another pause. "No." There it was, the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. "Why are you calling me?" I asked quietly. Because I already knew. Because I work in this stuff. Because I understand liens and leverage and what happens when optimism runs out. "You know how this works," Luke said. "The bank, foreclosure. Is there any way to stop it?" I leaned back against my couch, staring at the ceiling. There was always a way to delay, refinance again, sell partial equity, declare bankruptcy protection. But every option required something Dad had never mastered: humility. "Has he opened the certified mail?" I asked. "He says it's harassment." Of course he did. You can ignore a letter. You can't ignore math. I closed my eyes briefly. "Luke, how deep is it?" Another long silence. Deep. That told me everything. After we hung up, I pulled the file from my work bag. I wasn't supposed to take documents home, but this one felt different, personal, even if it shouldn't. The foreclosure timeline was already in motion. Notices filed, deadlines approaching. The house had been refinanced twice. The second time, they'd rolled business debt into the mortgage. They hadn't expanded operations. They had expanded risk. 2 days later, my mother called. Her voice was softer than I remembered, smaller. "Claire," she said carefully, like stepping across thin ice. "I don't know your father. I don't know your father's calling." I didn't ask why. "I heard," I said. She inhaled sharply. "So it's true." "Yes." A fragile silence filled the space between us. "They say the house could be auctioned," she whispered. Auctioned. The word didn't belong next to memories of Christmas mornings and burnt casseroles and Luke teaching me how to ride a bike in the driveway. But houses don't care about memories. Banks don't either. "Mom," I said gently, "have you seen the paperwork?" "No, your father says it's exaggerated." It wasn't. "Is he drinking more?" She hesitated. "Yes." I pictured him at the kitchen table, a bottle sweating onto old wood, insisting he could fix it. That control was just a matter of willpower. But systems don't bend for willpower. They bend for numbers. That night, Luke texted again. Dad doesn't know how bad it is. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. He does. He just doesn't want to admit it. A week later, Luke called once more. I found something, he said quietly. Another lien. I didn't even know about it. That's when I realized something crucial. This wasn't just pride. It was fragmentation. Dad had been juggling debts without telling anyone, stacking loans to cover older loans, signing papers without reading the fine print. The man who once burned my belongings to prove dominance had lost control of the very documents that defined ownership, and now the system was tightening. At work, I checked the updated foreclosure calendar. Auction date scheduled. 3 weeks. I printed the notice and held it in my hands. Daniel Whitmore. Property to be sold to the highest bidder. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt clarity. 16-year-old me believed power lived in raised voices and metal barrels full of fire. 25-year-old me knew better. Power lived in deadlines, in signatures, in understanding what happens when the gavel comes down. That night, Luke called again. If it goes to auction, he began. Yes, I asked. Would you come? I looked at the dates circled in black ink. I thought about the night I climbed out my bedroom window, about smoke in my lungs and $42 in my pocket. I'll be there, I said, but not for the reason he thought. 3 weeks wasn't long, but it was long enough to prepare. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one bracing for impact. I was the one reading the terms. The courthouse steps felt colder than they should have for early spring. I arrived 10 minutes early, not because I was nervous, because I don't walk into rooms unprepared anymore. The building stood heavy and square in downtown Cincinnati, its stone exterior indifferent to the quiet unraveling of families inside it. Foreclosure auctions aren't dramatic like movies make them. No shouting crowds, no chaotic bidding wars, just paperwork, investors in neutral-colored coats, attorneys holding folders, people pretending this is all routine. Luke stood near the railing, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. He looked thinner than the last time I'd seen him. The confidence he used to wear like armor had cracked. He noticed me and froze. "You actually came," he said. "I told you I would." His eyes flicked toward the entrance behind me. Dad didn't. That didn't surprise me. Pride has a way of skipping the final chapter. "Where's Mom?" I asked. "At home." Of course she was, watching a clock, listening for a phone call that might decide where she sleeps next month. An attorney stepped forward and began reading case numbers in a monotone voice. Properties moved quickly. Addresses, opening bids, pauses, sales. Then I heard it. Our address. For a second, something inside my chest tightened. Not grief, not anger. Memory. The driveway where Luke taught me to ride a bike. The maple tree Dad trimmed every fall. The kitchen where Mom hummed while washing dishes. All of it reduced to a case number. The opening bid was lower than market value. The liens scared casual buyers off. Too many complications, too much paperwork to untangle. That's the thing about distressed properties. They look messy to people who don't understand the system. To me, it looked solvable. An investor in a gray scarf raised his hand first. Small increase. Another bidder countered. I stayed still. Luke leaned closer to me. Are you bidding?" I didn't answer. The numbers climbed slowly, hesitant, careful. When the second investor dropped out, the gray scarf man hesitated. He checked his phone, probably calculating renovation costs. He raised his hand one more time. The attorney looked around. Any additional bids? Silence. That's when I lifted my hand. The movement felt almost weightless. The gray scarf investor turned, surprised. He studied me like I didn't belong there. I met his eyes calmly. Another increase, he countered. I raised again. Not reckless, not emotional, measured. The attorney repeated the new number. The investor hesitated longer this time. Foreclosures are about margins. If the math stops making sense, you step away. He stepped away. Any further bids? The wind shifted across the courthouse steps. I could hear traffic in the distance, someone coughing behind me. Sold. The gavel struck wood. It wasn't loud, but it echoed. Luke stared at me like he'd just watched gravity reverse. You bought it, he said quietly. Yes. For revenge? I looked at him fully then. If this had been revenge, I would have let the house go to a stranger. I would have let Dad explain to Mom why a moving truck was parked outside. No, I said. For control. We stood there in silence as people dispersed. Luke rubbed the back of his neck. He's going to lose it. He already did, I replied. That afternoon, I went to the house alone. The bank had changed the locks temporarily, but as the new owner, I had access arranged. The door opened with a hollow echo. Inside, the air felt stale, dim, smaller than I remembered. Sunlight cut through dust near the living room window. The couch was still there. The indentation where Dad always sat watching the news was visible in the cushions. I walked slowly through each room. My old bedroom was empty, the walls repainted years ago. No trace of who I used to be. I didn't feel triumph. I felt distance. This house once defined my limits. Now it was an asset lying in a portfolio. In the kitchen, I rested my hand against the counter and let one steady breath out. 16-year-old me thought power meant raising your voice loud enough to be feared. 25-year-old me knew better. Power meant standing quietly in a room you were once thrown out of and owning the deed. My phone buzzed. Dad. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. What did you do? He demanded. No greeting. I purchased a property, I said evenly. You had no right. The words almost made me smile. I had every legal right. Silence crackled through the line. You think this makes you powerful? He asked. I looked around the kitchen, the chipped tile, the worn cabinets, the house he tied to debt and ego. No, I said calmly. Understanding the system does. He hung up. I stood there for another moment listening to the quiet. The fire years ago had been loud. This felt different. Not loud, not explosive, just decisive. And for the first time, I wasn't standing outside the house watching something burn. I was inside, holding the keys. My father came to my office 3 days later. He didn't call ahead. He didn't knock softly either. The receptionist buzzed my desk. There's a Daniel Whitmore here to see you. Of course there was. Send him in. When he stepped through the glass door, he looked older than I remembered. Not physically frail, just diminished, like something invisible had been taken from him. Control, maybe. He didn't sit until I gestured to the chair across from my desk. You bought it, he said. Not a question. Yes. His jaw tightened. He glanced around my office, framed certifications on the wall, clean desk, organized files. You think this is funny? No. His eyes sharpened. You embarrassed me. I folded my hands calmly. The bank embarrassed you. I just read the paperwork. That hit. For years, paperwork had been his weapon, his authority, his shield. Now it was mine. You're going to throw us out? He asked. there it was. Not anger, fear. I slid a folder across the desk toward him. He didn't open it immediately. "What's this?" he asked. "A lease agreement." His head snapped up. "You expect me to rent my own house?" "I expect you to respect ownership," I said evenly. Silence stretched between us. "Your mother can stay rent-free, as long as she wants. No deadlines, no conditions." He looked down at the folder, but still didn't touch it. "And me?" he asked. "You can stay," I said, "under the lease. Market rate adjusted for income, utilities in your name." His jaw worked as if chewing something bitter. Years ago, he stood over a barrel of flames and told me I lived under his roof. Now he needed my signature to sleep in the same bedroom. The room felt very quiet. "This is revenge," he muttered. If it were revenge, I would have enjoyed this more. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like balance. "No," I said softly, "this is structure." He finally opened the folder. His eyes scanned the terms. He read slower than I expected, more carefully. Good. For the first time in his life, he was reading before signing. He didn't sign that day. He left with the folder under his arm, shoulders rigid. But he didn't slam the door. That mattered. "Luke called that night. I heard he went to see you," he said. "He did. He's furious. I'm aware." There was a pause. "I'm sorry," Luke said quietly. The words landed heavier than anything else that week. "For what?" I asked. "For that night. For not saying anything. For letting him do that to you." I didn't rush to respond. 16-year-old me wanted those words desperately. 25-year-old me understood something different. "You were surviving too," I said. He exhaled, shaky. "The garage, it's done," he admitted. "I can't fix it." "Then stop trying to fix what's already collapsed," I replied. "Start restructuring." He gave a weak laugh. "You sound like a lawyer." "I sound like someone who reads contracts." I connected him with a bankruptcy advisor I trusted, not to rescue him, but to give him options, clear ones, real ones. For the first time, he wasn't asking Dad what to do. He was asking questions himself. The house took 3 months to renovate. I didn't rush it. New flooring, neutral paint, updated kitchen fixtures. Nothing extravagant, just clean, stable, market ready. During that time, Mom called often, not about the lease, about recipes, about the neighbor's dog, about small things, normal things. Dad signed the lease eventually. He didn't apologize, but he signed. Sometimes growth doesn't look like confession. Sometimes it looks like compliance with reality. When the renovations were finished, I stood in the living room one last time. Sunlight poured through the windows, brighter now, without heavy curtains blocking it. The house no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like an asset. I listed it. Within 2 weeks, it sold above asking. The profit was clean, legal, earned through understanding. Half went into a trust under my mother's name, security she never had. The other half funded a financial literacy program at the women's shelter that took me in years ago. Classes on credit scores, on leases, on reading the fine print before signing. Because power isn't loud. It isn't fire in a barrel. It isn't shouting on a front lawn. It's knowing what a document means before someone else uses it against you. The night my father burned everything I owned, he thought he was teaching me obedience. What he actually taught me was this: never depend on a roof you don't legally control. Years later, I didn't destroy his house. I transformed it, not for revenge, for resolution. And the strongest revenge I've learned isn't cruelty, it's competence. If this story resonated with you, like, comment, and subscribe to Still Waters Payback, because sometimes the quietest victories change everything.